Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. This episode was packed with so many different conversations about people-pleasing, caregiving, anger, not really connecting to your own worth and value. So I can't wait to share it with you. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Eliza VanCort has an interesting story. She's an author, survivor, speaker, and basically was kidnapped 3 times by her mom as a child. Then, as an adult, she lost her ability to communicate after getting hit by a car, which we dive into that a little bit more. And now she has turned all of the work that she's done in therapy and in her life into a book. And it's called A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space, Stand Tall, Raise Your Voice, and Be Heard. And it was named Maria Shriver's Book of the Week. And she's also been on the Drew Barrymore show. We talked a little bit about that at the end of the episode. She's on TikTok, has a pretty big following on TikTok if you're on there. She has a podcast called Claim Your Space, and she has been on numerous media outlets. She was in People magazine and shared about just her story and her journey. And we just kind of dive into how did she get to the place where she is writing about claiming spaces. And I think that's something that many of us struggle with because we want to people please. We don't want to be rejected. We don't want to not be liked. And we talk all about that in our time together. And my invitation for these episodes is you don't have to agree with everything. Just open your heart and your mind up to see what is going to come through for you. That might be an invitation for you to grow, to expand. Maybe it's something you need to heal from the past, or currently maybe a struggle within yourself or in a relationship. And this podcast is really geared towards growing. I was talking to a friend of mine, and Adrian, shout out to Sam and Adrian. I hope this is okay to share, but she was saying that her husband Sam listens to the podcast as he's mowing. And I was like, hey, we're mowing and growing. That could be the name of a podcast. Anyways, wherever you are listening to this, thank you for listening. It means the world, and I appreciate you sharing it with your partner, your spouse, your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, all the people in your life that you want to have deeper, more vulnerable, authentic connections with. I just want to say thank you for being who you are and open-minded in your willingness to share this. I am so grateful for you. If you haven't grabbed the journal or gotten on the mailing list, you'll want to do that at Kristen, Kristen, D, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. Tag me on social, Instagram, Facebook, Kristen D. Boyce, Kristen. Sometimes it's with, people think it's with an I, it's with an E. Shout out to all the I-in Kristens. But without further ado, let's dive into this relationship with Eliza VanCort. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. Okay, you've heard me talk about claiming who you are, becoming more of yourself, working through your past so you can live more fully in the present. And my guest today has me intrigued. I dug into her background, and she has an amazing book out that I can't wait to tell you about. But really, we're talking about claiming space. Oh my gosh, how many of us have felt like, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to sound egotistical. I don't want people to think I'm the buzzword narcissist. I don't want to think I'm too much.
Right.
And so we lean away from taking up any space. So I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, Eliza VanCort. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast.
I am really excited to be here to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I thought what we'd do is start off by sharing your childhood, because lots of people come to therapy or on a therapeutic journey. And they're like, I don't want to go back into my childhood. No thanks. don't want to go there. So I thought it'd be appropriate to start there because we can't really do healing without going back to our childhoods.
Right.
And many
Definitely
people
not.
shy away from that. So can you say more about your journey with being kidnapped, your relationship with your mom, how you got to be where you are right now and writing this book?
Sure. Well, I actually had a really wonderful start to my life. I had a mom Mary Louise Marini VanCort, who by all accounts was an absolutely wonderful mother. And then when I was about 4.5, she got late onset paranoid schizophrenia. And she kidnapped me 3 times. She was not okay with my dad having custody, and she wasn't well enough to realize that he needed custody. And one of the times she took me across the country, actually once to Texas, from New York to Texas, and twice from New York to California. And one of the California trips, she kidnapped me across the country by truck, hitchhiking, from truck stop to truck stop to truck stop. And what happened on that trip really started to make me conflate invisibility with safety. I really felt like if I can just be invisible, I'll be safe. But of course, being invisible isn't safe. It's incredibly dangerous. And for little girls who get the message often that I'm going to reward you for being small, putting your life with that as the social construct, and then you're also, because of your personal life, striving for invisibility. Claiming space is really a lifelong struggle. And I got really good at doing it for other people in my life. But it wasn't until 2013 when I was hit by a car that my whole life changed. And if you'd like, I can tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, my dad was hit by a car too. Were you walking?
I was biking.
Tell me about being hit by a car.
Well, so I'm in a big cycling family. I'm going to brag. I'm so proud of my son, Jonah. My son, Jonah, had really struggled with a lot when he was growing up. And he found cycling, which really saved his life. And he ended up being the 3-time national collegiate cycling champion for the U.S. I mean, it was just like this incredible, wonderful, magical experience. So I was a big rider because I wanted to do and be with him. Not that I could ever keep up with him, but in the beginning. And I was going to an intersection and somebody blew. Used to that. I had already waited, even though it was my right of way. And then another person didn't go. So I thought, okay, I'm good to go. So I started to go and somebody just started tearing out of the intersection into the intersection. And I looked over and actually she had just posted 15 minutes earlier on Facebook. You call it road rage. I call it aggressively maneuvering around a-holes who don't know how to effing drive. So she went and she hit me. I ended up going up on the hood of her car, hitting one side of my head, getting knocked unconscious, getting thrown into the other side of the intersection. I got a bilateral brain injury and a subdural hematoma. And when I woke up, I thought it was the same day. And I went downstairs and I spoke to my husband and my ex-husband and my kids. And I couldn't believe they had this great meal on the table because he wasn't one to make this kind of meal. And I asked him how it happened. And he said, our neighbor brought it over. And I said, well, how's that possible? I mean, this just happened. And he said, Eliza, you've been awake for a week. Your accident was a week ago. So I had serious memory issues. I don't know exactly what the timeline was because it's all kind of blurry to me. But at a certain point, I was remembering better. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't communicating well and I didn't know it. And someone told me, I called them and said, why is everyone acting strangely? And they said, they're not. You're acting strangely. Your communication's shot. And you just really aren't making any. Someone said, you're talking like a stoned third grader. And I said, I don't know what that is, but it's not good. So I had to rebuild my communication brick by brick. And the process of doing that made me had to really break down the minutia of human behavior. And I started watching people in a way that I hadn't before. And because of my background, I was able to really synthesize all the information really well. And I basically feel like I broke down the code of communication in a way that people just don't do. And so I started doing this work, giving talks. It was so powerful. And the last piece is that women would follow me to the bathroom. They'd follow me to the bathroom and I would stand there and they'd say, I got to ask you a question I didn't want to ask in Q&A. And no matter where I was, that question was asked. And so suddenly I realized that there are about 45 questions, no matter where I am, that are asked. And women are asking these questions because they don't want to ask them in public. And I need to take these conversations out of the darkness and into the sunlight. And that formed the background of the book.
So let's dive into a little bit about the book because your childhood, your mom, there's this before mom up until 4.5, and then there's an after mom.
Mhm.
How did mom get diagnosed with that? Like, how did that onset happen? Because that sounds pretty drastic and abrupt.
No, my father actually said, Eliza, I think she had pre-schizophrenia, but it was the 60s and everyone was doing drugs and everybody was trying to act a little crazy. And so I just thought that was like part of her personality. And he's like, now I would realize something was really wrong. We just didn't understand mental health back then. And so I just didn't get what was going on. It seemed to me like the relationship was disintegrating because she was accusing me of cheating on her when I wasn't and all of these things. And now I realize it was the beginning of her paranoia. So it wasn't an overnight thing. But once she had a breakdown, there was no like, I wonder if she's mentally ill. I mean, she would walk down the street in my hometown talking to herself, moving her hand completely. One of the times they found her in Utah and she hadn't showered in so long that she had these boots on and they had to cut them off. Her feet were so swollen. I mean, she was really just gone. She was not the same person. And it's degenerative if it's not treated well. Every time she had a breakdown, she would never quite recover as much as the time before. It's not like the drugs we have now.
So how did your dad handle that? Did you have siblings? Was it just you? Tell us like how dad handled that when you were getting kidnapped 3 times, trying to raise you. Like, what was that like?
There was a national APB out on me and he was working with the police desperately to find me. It was terribly scary for him, obviously. We were so close. He was kind of the light of my life. And I actually remember one of the times he got me back, there was this whole elaborate scheme he got to get me back because one of the times I landed in foster care and he didn't want that to happen again. So he just found a way to get a friend to bring me to him. And I looked at him and I started to cry. And years later, he said, I thought you were crying because you didn't want to come back to me. And I said, no, I was crying because I realized my whole world had been upside down and you were the safe one. And I'd been constructing a world that this was okay because I just had to survive. So what he did, I think, and I can't stress this enough for anyone who has a child going through a hard time, not only was he a great dad and got me into therapy, which is so critically important, which was so important, is he got me women in my life who kind of lifted me up. I had a big sister, Alice, in the Big Sister, Big Brother program, who I'm still close to this day. When I had my accident, she was at the hospital. She made it before my parents did. These women who kind of decided I wasn't going to fall. They weren't going to let me just get lost. Saved my life. They saved my life.
Yeah. I mean, those relationships really matter when you're in trauma, when you're in survival state, when you are kind of lost at sea. Your dad sounds like he knew what to do, that you needed more support with therapy and Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And those resources really helped you.
And he befriended all my teachers. He also he befriended my teachers. One of my teachers, Roberta Wallet, I want to shout out her. She took me home almost every day after school, like it was her own daughter. I mean, he just really found a way to pull people into our situation to help, which is great because he was doing it alone. He was a single dad.
So
then my stepmother came along as well, I should say, Beth Prentice.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about that. So tell me about stepmom and how that was.
We're so close. Obviously, any step-parent, stepchild relationship can be rocky in the beginning. But I mean, I'm going to get over Clem, but she's like one of the gifts of my life. She's wonderful. Beth Prentice.
Okay, yeah. So tell me a little bit about how Beth showed up. Because a lot of times there's this wall there. Like if you've had trauma of getting too close to somebody, you're scared of getting hurt or rejected, or that's scary to get too close. How did you let her in? And then how did she show up that you felt safe enough to let her in?
Well, I wouldn't say it's overnight. I mean, I don't want to make it look so easy. It was a long, long road because I was a really traumatized kid. They didn't have the understanding of what trauma was back then. Crying and hiding or whatever they're doing. It's not your kid, so you don't get final say. It's really complex. And she and my dad had different parenting styles. But one thing I will say is when I was kidnapped, my dad couldn't find me because my mother was such a good mother before she got sick. And so part of him felt bad, trying to rush and find me because he thought, well, maybe she's okay. Because one of the times, the longest time I was kidnapped, she started out like a little not okay, and then she got much more not okay. So when she first left, he was trying to find me, but he wasn't just spending 24/7 on it because he thought, well, she's going to call me. I'll find Eliza. It will be okay. She's not that sick. She was such a good mom before. And my stepmother was like, no, don't count on how she was before. You have to get her back now. So she really worked to try to, yeah, I think that was critical. And, she's right now with everything going on with my book, she's the one who calls me every day and says, how are things going? I need to know, what's the latest? I mean, I call her my mom. I have 2 moms. I have my biological mom who really was wonderful to me until I was at a certain age, and then tried her best, but just couldn't do it. And then I have my stepmom, Beth, who raised me. And I think stepmom, stepchild relationships can be the most rewarding relationships because you have an ability to make an impact on a child's life without all this other mishigosh in there. And I think it's pretty special. I mean, I now have been with someone for 2 years and he has a child, and I absolutely adore his child. I feel like it's one of the gifts of my life.
Yeah. And it sounds like your stepmom was consistent, which your mom wasn't able to offer you. Like she was consistently showing up where your mom wasn't able to. She didn't have that to offer.
Oh, absolutely. And she also modeled some things for me. I really do believe the life you live is the life. She had been in the Peace Corps in Nepal. Both she and my father were public servants. She spent her life trying to get people to have access to capital to buy houses, even if they were, quote, high-risk loans. So she was really about deconstructing all the stuff that had happened with redlining and my father. So they both really could have done anything. They were brilliant people and they wanted to serve. And I think it doesn't matter if it's your stepmom or your biological mom, like she taught me the importance that if you have any kind of ability to do so, you need to try in the way that you are positive impact on the world. And that is a gift that I will carry with me my entire life.
It is. You've internalized that. So it is such a gift. Did she impact, it sounds like you've had a lot of people impact how you even wrote this book. So tell me the journey to get to writing this book. You had the accident where you were hit, you had your childhood, you had some mentors in your life. How did you get to this idea of writing about really taking up space, establishing your space?
Well, as I was recovering, I was noticing that there were people, they just commanded the room. And I would listen to them and think, okay, it's not that their words are different. They're saying the same words as everyone else, but somehow they have something really special. So I kept looking to see what is that one thing they have that other people don't have. I got to figure this out. And of course, life is never that simple. It was not one thing. It was 5 things. And what I realized is those 5 things, all of those like 45 different things people would talk to me about in the bathroom fit into one of those 5 buckets. And those are the 5 parts of my book. And for me, what was really the first thing that I was just so passionate about is that when it comes to communication, when I was learning and recovering, so much of what I was reading works really well for men, and particularly white men, because that's where most of the research is, and doesn't work well for other demographics and can actually make them worse. And no one was talking about it. And so I would have people come to me with coaching and they'd say, I went to this public speaking coach, or I went to a communication coach, or I went to someone who was trying to get me to help with my job interview and I got worse. And it was never a white guy because they really have that research for them, except for if it was a very highly introverted white man. But it was an extroverted white man. They really do well with the research we have. And so I really felt like it was critically important, since communication is our currency. It is really, no matter what your profession is, it's how we advance in our relationships, in our careers. Felt like it was really important to write that book. But then I started kind of dissecting it and realized there was so much more to the puzzle. And that's where the other 4 parts came in.
Okay, so let's break this down. If someone's like, I have some childhood trauma, I am scared that I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I am defective somehow, I am not pretty enough, smart enough, fill in the blank. Where would someone begin to start healing these parts from your experience and step into their worth to start claiming space?
Well, I can tell you the 5 aspects of claiming space, and I think that might be able to help answer that question. Do you mind if I give?
Yeah, let's jump into that. That'd be great.
So first of all, to me, claiming space is living the life of your choosing unapologetically and bravely. And bravery to me is not an absence of fear. I mean, there's nothing brave to me about like some person with a sword running into the war being like, I am not afraid. I'm like, how can you not be afraid? There are pointy things out there. So really, bravery is fear meeting action. That's bravery to me. And so the 5 aspects of claiming space that help you, if you do all of these things, you can actually live the life of your choosing unapologetically and bravely. Start with communication, your physicality and your voice. How do you move your body in space? How do you use your vocals? Do you use silence, etc.? The second one is, do you have community? Have you built a strong community around you, and have you gotten anti-mentors out of your community? Or are you letting them have a big bullhorn at the head of your table? The third thing is, how are you dealing with the stuff that happened in your past? I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm over my past, or you should move on. And I actually don't think that's possible. I think that's absolutely impossible. I don't think you should. The way I see it is people have these boulders. We all have boulders that fall on us. Everyone does. But the question is, can you whittle that boulder down to a little pebble that you kind of carry around in your pocket? And so when something happens, you can kind of touch it and go, oh, okay, I survived this. I'm going to be okay. Or, oh, I've seen this before. I know what to do now. Do we take those things that happen to us and use them as lessons to move forward? The fourth thing is, how do you protect yourself from aggressors? Really basic stuff. Do you know how to shut down microaggressions, things like that? And the fifth thing is intersectionality. I found that women who are really, really committed to uplifting all women, not just women who looked like them, and to forging friendships with all women, tended to do better. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I think the reason why is that when you hang out with people that are different than you, you make mistakes. And making mistakes is the foundation of growing and learning. And it also helps you to feel like you have a better understanding of the world, which is another way that you can be a more powerful person, is just knowledge and wisdom. So I think that if you can be mindful about, break down in my book exactly how to do them. Every chapter is like, this is how you could use your voice or your posture, or how do you deal with anti-mentors? If you just are mindful, no one's going to master that ever. But if you're mindful of trying to work on all those things, I truly believe, I've seen so many women who've written me letters after reading my book. I think you can really learn to step into your power and claim space. Except I do want to mention that part 3, which is your old stuff, you got to have therapy. You can't do it on your own. That's a huge part of it.
Yes, so true. So let's say someone says, because this happens a lot, they come in my office, they're like, I don't even know what to say. And if I say it, they're going to get mad. They make up these stories, or maybe the person will get mad. We don't know. But they're scared to put themselves out there and communicate because they're afraid of the other person's response or reactivity.
Right.
So they will just not say anything. They're like, it's better if I just don't say anything. So we're recreating that same pattern of not having a voice in their current relationships, really in all their relationships. Or they might bottle it up and then blow up. So how do you begin to help someone that says, they're going to get upset with me, I don't want them to be mad at me, and they're going to yell, or they're going to shut down? How do you help someone get the courage to begin communicating and having a voice?
Well, I've found that a lot of people who have that orientation also been taught to be caregivers. They've been taught to take care of other people in their communication and in their life. So what I usually do is I tell people to flip the script. So if this were you and somebody came to you with what you want to say, would you get mad and blow up at them? If you think you would get mad and blow up at them, then maybe you need to find a different approach to talking to them, because there's no reason that communication needs to result in screaming and yelling. If you wouldn't, but you think they would, then the question really is, for me, is this someone you need to be spending your time with? And if there's someone you can't get around, then how are you going to lay a boundary if they get angry at you? Anger will never kill you. And if somebody's angry at you and you've said your truth, that is really their feeling to manage, not yours.
Here's what I find. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. If you've had a parent that's been pretty inconsistent and reactive, highly emotional, blame and shame and fear of you hurt me and you on and on and on, do you think that is a foundational fear that people begin, if they don't work on it, internalize that, and it gets projected into every relationship, meaning they're afraid the person's going to react the same way?
100%. I mean, I have that. My boyfriend and I call it the piano. I call it the piano. And now he jokes about, I have this thing because I've had so much trauma. And every time I thought the trauma was over, there was another trauma. And it wasn't even because of the stuff that happened on the trip. I had all kinds of messed up ideas about all kinds of things. I was vulnerable to all kinds of abuse. So, and then that happened. There was just so much that I had to unpack. And it's scary for me because I feel like sometimes every time I walk out of my house, a piano is going to fall on my head. So whether it's a financial piano, it's a relationship piano, it's a career piano, all of these pianos. And I'm not sure you can ever retrain your brain to think the piano's not going to fall. Maybe you can. I don't know. I'd like to find that person who can help me do that. But I think what you can do is say, okay, so I'm feeling like this piano is going to fall. I felt like a lot of pianos have fallen, and they really haven't. And if they do fall, I can manage it. So I'm going to go outside, because what's the alternative? I'm going to go outside and I'm going to live my life. And I'm going to trust that things are going to be okay. And that if they're not, I'm an adult now. Because when that happened to me, I was younger and I didn't know what to do. And now I do.
Yeah, it's kind of like the inner child inside that's waiting for the next shoe to drop or the next bad thing to happen. And you're like, okay, sweetheart, hand over your heart center. Take a deep breath. You can handle this. It's okay. We're going to step outside of our comfort zone and live life rather than holding that protective part back and not taking any risks or not communicating or not sharing how you really feel. And that information you get back, talk to me about when someone communicates and they get information back. Let's say they find out someone doesn't like their boundaries or someone won't tolerate them having a voice. What is that information? How is that helpful to somebody? They start communicating, they get information back. How is that helpful to somebody?
Look, we all have different wants and needs. Our needs are not always going to be fair to the other person. I always say there are 3 things that you can do. I don't think you can, first of all, ever convince someone else to go along, to believe your boundary's okay if they don't, right? So if I say to you, I need to be putting lipstick on throughout this entire podcast or I feel insecure, and you say, I really don't want you to do that. And I say, yeah, but if I don't, I'll have a nervous breakdown. Maybe I will have a nervous breakdown. I don't know. But it's unlikely you're going to convince me otherwise. So the question is, can we find a solution? Can you say, oh, we'll do this podcast with the camera off or whatever? Or can you say, look, if you can't do this thing for me, I'm sorry, I can't have you on the podcast. So really, it's a question of, can you find middle ground? Can you actually talk to somebody and figure out a way with both of your true realities there, despite they're conflicting, which often is the case. Often we don't have to convince someone to find some sort of compromise. We can just find a compromise within both of our perspectives. Or sometimes it isn't the thing, it doesn't work. And that's okay too. Sometimes if you put a boundary down and someone says, I don't accept that boundary, and that boundary is not something you can move at all, you feel like it's impossible, which I think is pretty rare, then maybe that's not the person that you should be spending your time with because your boundaries and their desires are not matching.
Yes. I think this old idea of all or nothing, black and white, right and wrong, good and bad, like it's all gray. And 2 truths can be true at the same time. I can have my feelings, you can have yours, and they don't have to cancel each other out. We can have space for both. So I think claiming space is also claiming space for this duality, like, and 2 truths can be true. I think there's something to be said about that because we feel like, well, if they don't agree with me, then I'm not good enough. It's like, no, you don't need their agreement. They can have their feelings about what you said, and it doesn't make you less than, or it doesn't make you wrong.
And it doesn't make them wrong.
Exactly. That is like a huge truth that if we could all start realizing, I think it could change so much in relationships.
Oh, I think that's so true. I call that the Yoda cup, which is sort of weird. But the analogy I use is if I have I only coach people with it. Client comes in and says, I was hit over the head with the Yoda cup as a child and I can't be here with this. We can sit there and say, well, what if I put like a cup holder around it? What if I put like a little table around it? Whenever I drank, I moved. I mean, I don't have to convince them that it's absurd that this Yoda cup's not going to jump out of my hand and hit them on the head. And they don't have to convince me that like, oh, I don't need that Yoda cup when my grandmama gave it to me and I think all my power stems from it. People can have these, human beings are so fallible and we have so much stuff we carry with us. And if we're constantly trying to convince people to see our perspective when we're actually all the stars in our own movie and we forget that everyone else is not a supporting player in our movie, then we're never going to be able to find common ground. I think accepting people's reality as truth and working from there is really the first step rather than what most people do, which is try to convince the other person you're wrong and I'm right. Because they feel like, well, God, if I'm wrong, then that means I'm bad. Or if they don't believe me, then I won't get what I want, which isn't true.
Yes. And I think this leads to a deep concept for all of us that have had parents that we we all want our parents' love and attention. We want our needs met for that. We're wired biologically for that. And when we don't get it, we're seeking those needs in all these other relationships. And we think if they don't meet my need, then it might not be true. Maybe not. When you think of people pleasing and claiming your space, okay, one of the biggest fears I hear from people is what other people think. So they please to try to get their need met of connection, attention, yet there's parts of themselves they're stifling off. So then they still feel alone and empty. So when we think about claiming space and people pleasing, how do we overcome this need for people approving of us, liking us? In social media, we've got all the ways.
I'm a recovering people pleaser, so I relate to this question deeply. Because when you're in a situation where you're kind of fighting for your life, your whole survival is kind of based on making sure everybody likes you so they'll help you. Even my mentors, if I've been a jerk, I mean, these are angels walking around pretending to be humans, but some of the people who would help me might not have helped me. You feel like you have to be this really like the most wonderful, pleasing, whatever. But the truth is, people pleasing actually makes you piss people off, I think, more than it actually helps you in the long run. Eventually, you're going to get annoyed or upset, and you're either going to manipulate your way out of it, or you're going to let someone down, or you're going to overcommit and let them down. When I was younger, I liked to be around people pleasers because I couldn't stand any friction. I'd rather have the whole relationship based on like subtext and manipulation just so I didn't have to deal. But now I really specialize in women who tell me the truth. And I never have to worry about where they stand. It's like lying. If someone's lying, if you don't lie, you don't have to remember what you said. And I think people pleasing ultimately comes down to bravery, kicking that habit, and understanding that once you're in your center, and if you're saying your truth, then really you're going to attract people who want that. And those are the quality people you have around you. And I did lose people when I stopped people pleasing. But the people that I gained in my life are the most incredible quality people. And the people who I lost really couldn't deal with direct communication. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I'm not going to say, I think sometimes people are like, your life will be great and nothing bad will happen on the way. Change always is difficult. But if you're doing the change at service for your center and your soul or whatever you believe that is, it's worth it.
It is so worth it. Because at some point we get exhausted from the caretaking, the fawning, the people pleasing. And we're like, why do I feel alone? Well, because we're stifling our truth. And I do think saying your truth creates deeper connection. Do you experience that? Like when you come with your whole truth, your connections are so much deeper than the surface level connections.
How can you really connect with someone if you're not showing them your full self? Super easy, super clear. If you're guessing what someone thinks and trying to please them, you're not actually having a connection. You're making them think you're one thing, but you're not. But if you're actually coming at them with your truth, and then they like that, or they work with that, then they're actually liking who you are. They're discussing and collaborating with who you are. And that's so much better. The guy I'm seeing now, Dan, he has 2 parents. They're both therapists. So he's very therapized. And he has this thing where he's all about, you state your needs, I state my needs. Our feelings are never wrong, ever. We don't have to go along with the other person, but unless we know that foundational understanding of what the other person needs, we can never communicate well. And it's been good for me because I still get scared. I still don't want to say the full thing, but he's so good at it. Like, I'm going with him. I was always good at, but I wasn't that good at it with boyfriends. This particular person is just which I've had this excellent kind of communication with. And it's really partly because he's just so on board himself.
That's awesome. Because I drugged my husband 2 months into dating. I'm like, we're doing premarital counseling. Let's get the family history on the table. Let's get how to communicate on the table. He's like, okay. I was like, okay, you're a keeper if you're willing to do that. So Dan saying, these are my needs. Let's talk about it. Isn't it so freeing? Then you're not playing the game. Or you're not, your subconscious isn't like playing it out. You're being direct. And this is what I teach couples. Like if we could be more direct and you could say how you really feel instead of tap dancing around it. And then it feels exhausting.
Totally. And you make mistakes that are so silly. We had one yesterday. I was leaving my house. It was a little bit rainy. I wanted to go for a walk. For me, a walk means a very vigorous walk for an hour where my heart rate goes up. For him, a walk is a stroll. We had a debate whether walk or stroll were the same. But when we were leaving, it was cold out. And I thought, that's okay. I'll get my heart rate up. And I said, do you want an umbrella? And he's like, no. And I thought, oh, you know what? If he doesn't want an umbrella, then we're going to get our heart rate up anyway. It's fine. Maybe I won't go get my warmer coat. It's fine. And so I kind of assumed all these things about what he thought the walk would be and why he didn't want to get an umbrella and all of these things. When really, I forgot he just hates umbrellas because he doesn't like to poke people because he's tall with them. And I really should have gotten that raincoat with the little fur lining inside of it, but I things that he wanted. And so I just sort of blew off my needs. And I ended up freezing to death. So, and I started basically doing calisthenics walking down the street, which I don't care at this point. I'm too old to worry about that. But it was one of those things where I just thought, wow, if I had just said a couple more clarifying things before this walk, it would have been so much more pleasant. But I made assumptions and tried to please him, and now I'm freezing.
Yeah, it's so powerful communication. And I think for me, what I've learned with clients is the younger part of me is the people pleaser. That's the part that is trying to get a need met. It's the younger part of me. The other part of me that can speak truth with love and patience, and it doesn't always have to be perfect, is my higher, more adult self coming online. And when fear comes up, I'm like, ooh, I'm going back into my fawning. And then when I'm more aware, I can be more clear and communicate more clearly what I need, what I want, and check in and say, what are your thoughts? Because it doesn't mean agreement. Doesn't mean they have to agree, to your point, right?
Totally.
Recognizing the younger parts that still might need something that I might even need to process in therapy, or I might need to dig in a little bit deeper to see how that got activated. I think it'd be so helpful, and romantic relationships and our kids will mirror that back to us in so many ways.
I mean, I always joke that whenever I end up looking back going, why did I behave that way? I have this metaphor that like my inner child like went on my shoulder and was like, yeah, I'm driving now. I'm like, wait, what are you doing here? You should have nothing to do with my choices. I said that to my friend who's a therapist, and I was like, does this mean I have multiple personality disorder? And she said, no, we all have an inner child. And sometimes they do kind of go up on your shoulder and take hold of the wheel. They do doing that. You know?
Especially when we get really scared or something, quote unquote, triggers us. And then we're like, oh, now, and it's so seamless. Like 1 minute you could be in your adult self, and the next minute your 8-year-old part or 6-year-old part or 13-year-old part can come online. And then when you and your partner can recognize that for yourselves, and I can say, okay, that was my 8-year-old self. I can see how that was really hurtful, and I'm so sorry I hurt you. Boom. Yeah. Now we've made a quick repair. I'm self-aware to know that was my inner child. I can own it, and I can communicate clearly and directly. And I think that is claiming space in so many ways. What are your thoughts?
I have a chapter in my book called The Need to Be Right Will Make You Wrong. I totally agree with you. I mean, anytime you're vested in your rightness and you're invested in convincing people and you're invested any of those things, it just doesn't work. And I think society right now in general, and we're dealing with this right now in a geopolitical way, is people are really needing. I mean, I posted something on Facebook about what's going on in Palestine and Israel, and it was really just me saying as a parent, and I know people in Palestine and I know people in Israel, and I said, as a parent, this is just breaking my heart, and it's just so painful, and I can't believe what these parents must be going through. And someone said, by not taking a side, you are siding with the oppressor. And I said, if you can't show empathy for people, if you can't see the human side of people, then I feel like we've really lost our way. That is not to say you can't take a stand politically. I think that's incredibly important. But I think also we need to see the humanity behind people, or else how are we going to make things better? I mean, I see that. I'm not a Trump supporter. I see that with Trump supporters. People demonize them as if they're these horrific gargoyles. And I always say, why do you think people believe what they believe? Maybe you need to have a conversation with people, because if we did, you might understand how we landed here. And that's really important. And I think anytime you demonize or say someone's a monster, or you stop seeing them as a person, we're kind of done.
I think that's the whole two truths can be true. I think that's the whole concept. If we could access more empathy for ourselves and claim space for that, I think it allows us to hold space and more empathy and compassion for others and claim space for that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why the last 1/5 of my book is about claiming space for each other. I always say you can't claim space with a one-woman army.
Yeah. And I think the hardest journey is claiming space for yourself. A lot of people are like, oh, I claim space for other people. I can have a voice for them. I advocate for them. And I'm like, well, what about you? And then that's a whole different level of kind of a rumble of, well, I don't deserve it, or I'm not worthy. That's the rabbit hole we can get down.
Absolutely. I also think that women are taught that it's totally fine to be mama bears for our children and to be nurturing for others. But when we advocate for ourselves, that's very different. You know, you'll see people say, oh, it's so great how she went in there and got that teacher to do what they wanted for their kid. She was so direct, and I could see she was mad, and it was great. Totally fine to be mad on behalf of your kid. If someone came and disrespected that same woman at work and she went in and she had the same energy and the same level of advocacy, she would get pushed back. So we also need to acknowledge that our society does not make a lot of space for women to show anger. And anger is power. There's nothing wrong with anger. Out of control rage, not a good thing. But focused anger is part of where we get our power. That's our body and our feelings way of saying something isn't right here and you need to listen to it.
Yes. And I think anger turned inward is depression. Like when we're not allowed to express it as a child, we're not allowed to get angry, we're not allowed to say how we really feel about something, you will see a lot of depression and shutdown and almost like a numb, I'm walking through life, but I'm not really feeling because I've turned all that anger inward. And that's a lot of journey in therapy because people are afraid they're going to turn out like their parent that was a rageaholic or was out of control with their anger. So they're afraid to feel it, or maybe they weren't allowed to feel it because it was unacceptable. So a lot of it's rumbling through all those emotions, including anger, and letting that be a part of expression, expressing it. That's hard for women in particular.
Totally. And it's particularly hard for certain demographics of women, like Black women and the angry Black woman trope. If a Black woman shows the slightest bit of anger in a workplace setting compared to a white woman, she's going to get slammed. Even if she's or even if she's not showing anger, even if she's just being direct, she's going to be called an angry Black woman. So there's just so many layers to the messages we give people and the tolerance we have for different behaviors. And really everyone should be able to say, I always say the way that men are able to say, look, I'm not okay with this and I want to do this differently. In a workplace setting, I've seen men do this all the time. Look, that was not done well. We need to do something differently. Let's do here. I think that's great. I think everyone else needs to learn that. Like, wonderful. Let's all see that and do it as well, because that's how we should all have the right to do that. And it's a very direct and wonderful way to communicate. But if you're told you're going to get eviscerated if you do it, of course you're going to get passive aggressive. And that doesn't benefit anybody.
No, that just perpetuates more of what you don't want.
Exactly.
So what are the top 3 things you've done in your life to work on claiming space? What are the top 3, would you say, most helpful things you've done to help you claim space?
I love it when I do podcasts and somebody asks me something that I've never been asked before, and you just did. Let me think. The top 3 things that I have done, things or feelings, or do you not care?
Either. I'm open to whatever comes through for you.
I think the first thing is my teaching. My background's in political science for undergrad, but I was an acting teacher for 20 years, and I developed this version of the Meisner technique, which is all about the minutiae of human behavior. If you're watching behind me, there are all these scribbles on the wall. Those are my students when they graduate from my program. They sign the wall. And so those are the people I love behind me, which always feels really wonderful. I think the first step for me was really learning how to understand humanity a little more, which was then compounded by my accident. Those 2 things made a huge difference. That helped me claim space, really taking time to observe human behavior, observe the inequities, observe what works. I think that's incredibly important. And for me as an extrovert, it's hard because I like to talk, but when you have a head injury, you have to shut up. So that taught me, I got to observe a lot. And I think introverts have some really cool skills with that. The next thing I think is not a problem, that fear is not going to kill me. Fear is just literally a sensation in my body. If my heart's racing, if my throat's tightening, if I'm sweating, that's not going to hurt me. And so if something scares me, that doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. It actually means this thing is important, or else I wouldn't be afraid. It's my body's way of saying, this is important to me, so I need to do it. And I think the last thing I've done, if I think about in my life, is understanding that if you're doing this for yourself only, if you're out there to try to find your own enlightenment and truth, but you're not reaching out your hand for people who maybe aren't there and pulling them with you, that it's hollow. That I think that when we rise together, we rise so much higher. And I think that's a critical part for every human being to understand. And it helped me. It changed my whole orientation on the world. And it's so critically important. And it empowers me as a person.
I love those 3. Those are amazing. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for your wisdom. Where can people find you, the book? Tell us all the things.
You can find me on all of the social media. There's some weird dummy account for authors on Facebook. For me, it's not real. Go to my personal page. That's where you can find me on Facebook. I have a pretty big community on TikTok. I think I have 250,000 followers or something. And it's really cool people and some interesting conversations. So yeah, social media. And then also my website, ElizaVanCort.com, which can tell you I make my living giving talks and doing workshops. So if you want to reach me, you can reach me through my website.
Fantastic. And you've been on the Drew Barrymore show. You've been like doing all the circuit. What's been your favorite interviewer out of all the ones you've done? All the shows you've been on?
Yeah, I don't remember her name. It was a Good Day LA on Fox. If you go to my website, the interview is there.
I watched that one. Is it your first one? Is it your first one? It's like 6.5 minutes long.
It's pretty long, yeah. It's a Black woman. And we talked a lot.
Interview. Okay.
We talked a lot about intersectionality. And that was really my favorite that I've ever done. I just love that one. I love meeting Drew. She's just the most kind, thoughtful. Yeah, I was nervous and she just locked eyes with me and I felt immediately at ease. She's great. And then I've actually loved being on the Daily Blast Live. Got to answer some funny questions about Barbie, which to this day was probably the most fun I ever had in an interview. They asked me about a boycott of the Barbie movie, and I just had such a delicious time answering why that was the silly thing to do. So it was a lot of fun.
That's so fun.
So much fun.
Well, thank you so much, Eliza, for your heart and what you're putting out into the world and the difference you're making. I am so grateful for you, and I know the listeners will be too after hearing our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's so critically important. Truly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.